Okay, so this is a City of the Singing Flame review by Ashton Smith. And before I commence on, the review of the City of the Singing Flame, I want to give like a background on who Ashton Smith is. There's a picture of him right there. He was a pulp fiction writer from the early 20th century, and he was contemporary to Robbie Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, L. Ron Hubbard, and many other men writers who wrote in pulp fiction era. But the pulp fiction era is basically, an era where a bunch of people, authors, wrote for pulp magazines, which were very cheap paper magazines that were published, that were mainly had to do with short stories, like little short stories to entertain you while you're like on a train ride, or just it was basically the Nintendo Switch at the time. This was at the peak of the industrial society. People were reading more. Education was really great. So a lot of people were reading. This is also the era of modernists. So like Steinbeck, Fitzgerald, the 1920s and stuff like that. So Ashton Smith was one of the authors of a variety of different kind of pulp fiction magazines, and he's considered a pioneer of fantasy and also horror. He contributed to H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu Mythos, and his writing style is very purple pro-ish type of writing style. He had a prose poetry writing style, and people compare him to H.P. Lovecraft's writing style, but I see similarities. You can compare them, but H.P. Lovecraft wrote more of a British type of archaic manner. He was mostly influenced by like British culture and English, whereas Ashton Smith is more like an Americanized like writer. Like he used a variety of like words, archaic words and big words, and he had nouns, which I personally believe he had a variety of terms for nouns, and the reason why they say this is because he studied the dictionary, and he also, another big huge factor is that he also studied the Encyclopedia Britannica, so his knowledge was out there, and so he knew lots of nouns, which played a huge factor in his writing. Verbs, no, not necessarily verbs, but adverbs mostly. He abuses adverbs, adjectives. There's another thing that makes me distinctive is the prepositions. He was basically just like very, very so superior. His writing style was just so superior, like exceedingly. In my personal opinion, it exceedingly surpasses H.P. Lovecraft's prose poetry writing style, which is just using conjunctions of the particular term which, W-H-I-C-H, and a bunch of adverbs, adjectives, and the abuse of commas. So that's basically H.P. Lovecraft. Now Ashton Smith on the other hand is more. He's just far superior, in my opinion. It's just my opinion. People are probably gonna dispute that, but it's just my opinion. And in terms of background, now this is like a contrasting. I'm comparing and contrasting Ashton Smith and Lovecraft at this point. But yeah. This is gonna be like a whole lecture, I guess, like a whole probably 30 minutes. Uh, so yeah, Clark Ashton Smith had a better background in terms of life than H.P. Lovecraft. But Clark Ashton Smith wasn't really an artist. Wasn't really a writer, I mean. He was more of an artist. He wrote poetry. He's mostly renowned for being a bard. He wrote lots of poetry in his youth. And then he just came into the Pulp Fiction era just to make ends meet, just to make that money. Because that was the thing at the time, to make money, to write these short stories. So when he was in his late 20s, he needed money to support his family, so he contributed to writing short stories. And within 5 years, from 1929 to 1934, he wrote lots and tons, excessive amounts of short stories, and only short stories. He only had like 5 years of experience of writing short stories, whereas H.P. Lovecraft had like 17 or 16 years. So H.P. Lovecraft is more adapted and accustomed to writing novellas and short stories, had more experience writing in terms of in compared to Clark Ashton Smith. But I still personally prefer Clark Ashton Smith because of the whole background. He has no racist background at all whatsoever. He was a really humble guy. He worked in the fields picking fruits. He was an editor. He basically got a feel of that being a middle class citizen. You know, he didn't come up with a really wealthy family like Lovecraft. Lovecraft just inherited his family's wealth. He just, he was an introvert. He was extremely racist. He wrote lots of letters. Like I remember Lovecraft said that he punched like a lot. He wished he would punch as immigrants in the face. When he was in immigrant neighborhood in 1926, 1925 to 1926. So yeah, and he also adored Hitler. He became renowned for writing letters, racist letters, chastising black people in his amateur journalism. And he created a small little cult kind of from that amateur journalism he did in his early years. And yeah, all that crazy background. What else is there to say about Clark Ashton Smith? Okay, so let's start on the review of The City of the Singing Flame. Alright, so this story, I've read three of his stories so far now. I read this, The Night of Melion, and The Tales of Satampa Zeros. Now, I personally like The Night of Melion. I love that story. Out of all the other stories I've read, I love this one the most. But on this recent one that I'm doing a review on, The City of the Singing Flame, he's very transitive. He's really transitionist in his writing. So basically, like a guy, he goes to Crater Ridge. He goes to like big boulders in his world. And he finds a portal to this fantasy world. It's really vivid, colorful, and then he realizes he meets and beholds and witnesses these really insect-looking creatures. They're colorful and like basically this variety of queer, quaint, strange creatures, monsters, if you can say. And he witnesses. So as he explores this vivid purple violet grass, foliage of sapling, tamarack trees, Cyclopean City. So he enters the Cyclopean City in his fantasy world, and then he realizes all these people are following the music that's coming from somewhere. And so they're getting lured and attracted to this song or music. He doesn't say in particular what kind of music it is, but it's just strange music. So you have to use your imagination on that. And they get lured by this music, and that music is coming from a flame of like huge bowl that has flame inside, that has fire, and they all just into there. Alright, so once he discovers this amazing, vivid, colorful world where, the grass is purple and, there's like insect, butterfly, monster creatures, he describes he goes in very particular detail, like with you know, post poetry manner in describing um, all these objects he's seen in this fantasy world. Like he goes in detail with Cyclopean City. There's very, columns, colonnades, statues. Oh, another thing I just remembered, these creatures are huge. They're massive than us humans. They're a lot bigger than us. There are some, they're a lot bigger than us. And then there's the butterflies that are a lot bigger than us. I think the butterflies are bigger. Yeah, they should be bigger. But yeah, there's these creep monsters, these aliens basically. It's more like an alien fantasy world. The aliens have like crystal like eyes, they have antennas, green that move up and down, very colorful antennas on their foreheads. So uh and so he discovers this amazing fantasy world, and then he says he could. This is where I was talking about when he transitions the setting quickly. He just immediately, after saying this amazing prose on describing this world, he immediately says, "All right, so I went back to the normal world. I went back to planet Earth, and then I brought, and then so he says, now I'm gonna bring a pistol." And this is the part was confusing because he says he's gonna go back in the world with a pistol, like quickly, like not even like it was nothing. It had nothing, uh, which had nothing to do later on in the story at all. So I was expecting he was gonna kill, you know, these monsters with his pistol. If he tried to kill a giant, one of these giants with a pistol, that wouldn't have been amazing. But I also feel like this story was rushed and stuff, and now you'll see why later on. So that's one point why it was rushed. Like he literally just mentioned a pistol. He brought a pistol into this fantasy world after he came back to planet Earth, and so he goes back again. Goes back detailing, giving a lot of details, like descriptive, like all this, you know, gods, heavens, the high sky, cerulean, butterflies, and then he goes back to planet Earth, and then he says, all right, so now instead of bringing a pistol, he's gonna bring a human being. He's gonna bring a partner, because he wants somebody else's perspective on this world, on his fantasy world. So he gets this other person's perspective. So he brings his friend, who is an author as well. He's a fiction writer, science fiction writer. And prior to bringing him, the first time he went to the world, he put in, because like I mentioned, the music that lures the monsters into a fire. Um, he put like cotton balls into his ears so he can hear the music, so he can resist the music. That's really attractive, and eventually lures him into the fire and gives him lots of ecstasy and lots of fractures. And so he brings his friend, and he told his friend, all right, so we're in a fantasy world. He's very surprised, and he goes really quick in detail on his friend's reactions, like on the world fantasy world, like, oh yeah, it's amazing. So I've never experienced it before, yeah. And then he tells his friend to put on a cotton in his ears, but his friend doesn't want to. He's like, no, I'm good. I want the full experience. I want to hear this music. It's amazing. And so he hears it. So he doesn't. So his friend immediately gets lured and lured and lured and lured closer, closer to the now, you know, not remote flames. And he says he described it really funny. So he does die. His companion does die, and he jumps into the fire. But he says it. He describes it very funny. He said like in a allegorical or in a priest manner, in a really religious priest manner. Head first, he leaps, he jumps into the fire, which is really funny, in a really religious priesty manner. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Alright, so this is where he starts to feel like it's rushed. So he witnesses his friend die because he got thrown into the fire and gets eradicated into ashes. And so I feel like after he goes back into planet Earth, after he immediately left and went back to planet Earth. And then he starts to have like these concepts and ideas like of envy. He started to feel envy, and because his friend actually felt a huge fracture, a huge pleasure of getting into the fire. So he starts to feel pleasure. He starts to feel jealous, and he literally, I, and then he also feels depressed and sad because his companion died, and he literally goes back into the world, and decides to not have the cotton ears, have the cotton in his ears, and pretty much that's where the story ends. Like, okay, he kills himself basically, or maybe not. It's a cliffhanger, kind of, but not really. So basically, no, and then he goes out and kills himself. So that's literally it. That's the whole plot. The guy committing suicide. Discovers this really fancy world, and then he commits suicide. And I feel like it was rushed. Like I can't fathom on what was the point in mentioning him bringing a pistol, a revolver. I mean, not well. I guess a revolver is a pistol, I think. But yeah, it was a revolver in particular. And so he brings a. Yeah, I just can't fathom on why he mentioned about that. He really puts you. He disappointed me on that aspect. Like I was like, oh, he's gonna use it to kill one of these creatures, and I was like, but I feel like Hawkins Smith is not that kind of a writer. But yeah.